Hi everyone, it's Alan Stewart with your Real Estate 101 tips and tricks for the week of December 1st, 2014. And today we want to look at the GST and the transitional tax and how it applies to new construction until April the 1st, 2015. So we've got another quarter or so to go here where we're going to have to continue to look after the GST and transitional tax issues. And I want to show you exactly how to do that so there's no errors. We've had a number of people who have been struggling to make sure they get through this properly. So there's two things you need to get, two websites you're going to need to access. One is realtorlink.org. And it'll take you to this sign-on page. And I'm using Internet Explorer, and I'll show you one of the benefits of doing so. The other thing we want to look at, or the website we want to visit, is the BC Real Estate Association, bcrea.bc.ca, for their tax calculator. So let's go back to Realtor Link. We're going to log on. You put in your V number, and then you put in your password. And then a little unknown feature that you can use on Internet Explorer. It doesn't seem to be available in Chrome, but on Internet Explorer, this little I symbol, if you right-click and hold down on that, it'll show you what your password is. Test pass I put in here, that's not my password, and every time you just hold your mouse down and move it over that little eyeball, it'll show you what you've typed. And I know that it's really frustrating to type in the wrong password on this system because it keeps sending you back. So if you have any questions, just left-click on that little eyeball to see what you've typed in there. Okay, so here we are at realtorlink.org. Now, I'd really encourage you to make this a kind of a standing login page for you when you start up in the morning. It's got your residential ML Exchange, Fusion here, your commercial access, as well as web forms, Stat Center, an easy link to Stat Center, Real Talk, which is like Facebook for realtors, all the tweets from the real estate board so you can find interesting things that you may want to retweet yourself or like, talks about the blanket drive, all those things are right there and available for you. So this is a great dashboard. It also has all your member information and easy links to all the different sites like the BC Real Estate Association. So we've got that up here now. I'm going to click on web forms and let that load up in the background. And we're all used to seeing this on web forms. One easy thing for you to do here to make a little more space on your window is to simply click Hide Announcements here on the top right-hand corner, and it gives you more information to look at. And then we're going to click Printable Forms, and it gives us all our printable forms that are available. Let's go ahead and just type in new, because what we're looking for is the new construction, new home addendum that relates to GST. So we type in new, we don't hit enter, and up comes the results that for new. And we want to be using, there's two different forms here. One, the contract of purchase and sale of a new home addendum, seller is a foreign supplier. And two, contract of purchase and sale of a new home addendum, seller is not a foreign supplier. What's the difference between those two forms? Well, effectively, it's just in the language that comes up when you first load the form. I'll show you the not foreign supplier one, but we'll go back and use the one that's used almost exclusively, which is where the seller is not a foreign supplier. And I'm sorry, I think I may have said that incorrectly. We're looking at the one where the seller is a foreign supplier. And in this one, under paragraph 2, it says the 2% BC transitional tax may be payable by the buyer. And then 3 says because the seller is a foreign supplier, the buyer will be required to remit directly any 2% transitional tax payable. Outside of that, there's not many other changes to the form. It looks very similar to the one where we're talking about not a foreign supplier. And I don't think there's anything else that I've seen that, that differentiates the two. But let's go back to web forms and use this one that you'll use almost exclusively where the seller is not a foreign supplier. Click on edit and away we go. You can put in a V number obviously and have it auto-populate. We're just going to edit a blank form. So as that's loading up here on our web forms page, let's go back and take a look at the BC Real Estate Association's website. And in particular, under Government Relations, you'll find the HST PST tax calculator. Okay, so you're going to click on that. Don't be afraid to bookmark that or save that as a favorite so that you can have easy access to it. Now, when you arrive to this tax calculators for British Columbia, which obviously is what we want to look at, there's 3 different tax calculators available. One that starts with a purchase price, including the sales tax, net of any available rebates. So if your house is worth less than $450,000, there may well be some rebates available here for you in terms of the transitional tax and the GST. So this one here, the second one down, starts with a purchase price that includes the full amount of the sales taxes, but doesn't include any available rebates being backed out of it. And then finally, the tax calculator that starts with the purchase price not including any sales taxes. We're going to look at number 1 and 3 today and just make sure we're filling them out correctly. So let's go ahead and start with a tax calculator, and we're going to use as an example a new home buyer that's going to purchase a house, their first home, priced at $299,000 from a developer. So is this new construction? Pretty simple question, yes or no. Now, is it a simple question? If the seller has rented out the property, it's no longer deemed to be new construction. It's been used, the principal residents have been used, and the developer has a responsibility to submit the applicable GST as soon as he starts renting out that property. So if you're working with developers, make sure they understand that as soon as it becomes a taxable property for them, or as soon as they put a tenant in there, they're going to have to remit the entire amount of the GST, which will stop a lot of developers from doing it just because of that. Second question, first-time home buyer? Yes, in this case it is. Degree of construction as of April 1st, 2013. This is brand new. That's only started up later than April 1st, 2013, so there was no construction on the ground, so less than 10% applies. And the purchase price, as we said, $299,000 is what this buyer is prepared to pay at the end of the day, regardless of what the tax implications are. So here's our taxes. $14,486 worth of GST. There's no transition tax applicable because it started after April 1st, 2013. Let's just see what happens if it were to have been started construction beforehand. There would have been $5,684 worth of transition tax applicable. But again, this is not applicable in this case. The purchase price before the GST tax then would be $289,729. That's the effective price that you would report to the MLS, right? We're supposed to report our purchase price net of any GST. The property transfer tax would be $3,795, but because they're first-time home buyers and because it's under the $450,000 limit, that is waived completely. So the total taxes are effectively just the GST. The rebate that's going to be taken for this new home buyer is $5,215, but remember, all we're concerned about is what the total cost is for our buyer, and we're going to assign that rebate to the seller at completion. Net taxes to be submitted to the government, $9,271. Total cost, $299,000. I would print this page out if I were you, or at least take a screenshot of it and save it in your file. And let's go back to web forms and see what we can do with this information. So on this addendum, we're going to go out and go ahead and start filling out the questions. The purchase price for the property is, and we know this, $299,000. Now, question number 4 has 2 potential answers. You're only supposed to either initial A or B, not both. So it does not include any GST applicable on the purchase price? No, we know that we're looking at a gross number here. It includes the GST. So it includes the GST of how much? Well, in this situation, what I do and what I encourage you to do so that we don't make mistakes with our calculations is go back to the tax calculator, left click and drag across the number, right click on that same number and copy it. Now we can't make any mistakes when we're putting it into the form. Now we go back to the field, we're going to right click and paste, and that number will automatically go into our GST amount, so we know we haven't made any mistakes. This is where your buyer and seller will initial, and you notice that when it comes to GST, the initials are BS, which is quite appropriate. Question number 5 says the purchase price of the property, buyer and seller to initial again, either A or B that applies, does not include the 2% BC transition tax, and if applicable, such tax is payable by the buyer, or does it include the 2% BC transitional tax in the price? Well, it does include the transitional tax. In this case, we know the amount to be 0. So we're just going to go ahead, and I know that's ridiculous that I'm going to copy and paste it, but just as a matter of principle, paste that in there. Again, BS to tax, and we're going to have our buyer and seller initial in the appropriate boxes. Now we're going to scroll down to page 2, and it asks us, the Government of Canada's GST HST new housing rebate, we're either going to choose A, B, or C, has not been taken into account in determining the purchase price, and the buyer is responsible for filing with the Canada Revenue Agency. Well, we know that we want all the GST and the rebates to be included in the purchase price, so B applies. Has been taken into account in determining the purchase price, and the buyer will assign its right to such rebate in the amount of what? We go back over to our tax calculator. We know that the federal rebate on GST is $52.15. We drag over it with our left mouse button held down. We right click and copy. Go back to web forms, right click and paste. That number is now in there. And one more time, B S for our sellers and buyers to initial the appropriate one. Or if it's not applicable to this transaction, when the housing has a fair market value of less than $450,000, it's used as a primary place of residence. So we'll look at that in the next example. That's about it for the form when it comes to a contract of purchase and sale of a new home addendum. That gives everybody, including the conveyancers, lawyers, and buyer and seller, all the information they need. It puts in here that the buyer is going to assign the rebate to the seller. It answers all the questions. So this is why it's a legal requirement now that these contract of purchase and sale of a new home addendum be filled out and completed by the realtors before the sale takes place. It's the incumbent on the seller and the seller's agent to make sure that this addendum is filled out. Let's go back now and look at one other example. So we're going to go back to the HST tax calculator, and this time we're going to look at a tax calculation that starts with a purchase price that does not include sales tax. It's often argued that people don't want to advertise a price that includes a sales tax because never would you go to the store and advertise something after the tax has been applied, because it makes the product look more expensive. What the developer is actually getting here is the amount that does not include the sales tax. So we're going to click on that one. We're going to start a new web forms here. We'll just go back and replace the information we've got as we make our way through it. So in this instance, let's talk about an example where we have a new home which has been built by someone who's been working on it for a long time, and they haven't moved into it, and it's selling at $1.2 million. So it is a new construction? Yes. Is it a first-time home buyer? In this instance, no, not a first-time home buyer. The degree of construction, we had the foundation poured back in March of 2013, so greater than 10% as at April 1st, and the purchase price, fair market value, $1,200,000. Okay, that's going to go ahead and make all the calculations we need to know. The GST, flat 5%. No rebates available, $60,000 due and payable. The transition tax, $24,000, which is 2% of the sales price because it was constructed, at least 10% of it was constructed before April 1st, 2013. There is no rebate available because we're above the threshold and because this isn't a first-time home buyer, so the GST is fully applicable. And the property purchase transfer tax of $22,000, again, no exemption from that because we don't have a first-time home buyer. Net taxes paid, $106,000. Let's go ahead and fill out our web forms again using that information and looking at the fields that are appropriate. So in this case, we're going to change that to $1.2 million. So this does not include any GST applicable. I'm going to delete that. Delete those initials, and this time we're going to initial in these boxes under BS. Then we're going to go down. The purchase price of the property does not include the 2% transition tax. It's easy. It does not include it because we're not including any taxes here. We can delete that and delete these two other initials as well. The Government of Canada GST HST new housing rebate has not been taken into account and determine the purchase price, and the buyer is responsible for filing. Doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not applicable in this case. So again, we go down to C, is not applicable to this transaction. Why? Because it has a fair market value of more than $450, and regardless of whether or not it's a primary place of residence, it won't be applicable. So we're going to initial that one in this instance, and the rest is easy peasy. Simply have your buyer sign both pages as well as your seller, and you're all done. So that's your tax calculator. I hope you picked up a couple of tricks along the way here, and that you'll be able to complete these forms properly and save any confusion at completion. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to call, and we'll see if we can't help you out.